Good morning. About time to begin our Bible class this morning. Wait for a minute or two and our slide to click over. So I'm going to be filling in probably the rest of this month, so this morning and then probably the next couple Sunday mornings. I'm going to give my brother a break. I know he's got a lot going on here of late. He needs to get tied up, so I'm going to give him a break for this rest of this month and do the auditorium class for that time. And Roger brought up a good point just a minute ago. See, my brother has a really good brother. I think that's true. He's got a better brother than I do, I think. But, no, so, as everybody is aware, we've been studying Jeremiah for a good while in the auditorium class. So I'm not going to continue with Jeremiah per se, but I am going to continue with what I feel like is on the same avenue there, I guess. So we've talked a lot about the Israelites and their sin and the punishment that God gave them for their sin, the captivities that they suffered and all that. And we've looked at that in detail in Jeremiah, of how Jeremiah told them that unless you repent, you're going to be taken away, and how that came to pass. So I thought it would be a good exercise for us to go through in a little bit of detail, maybe some of the sins of the Israelites over time. So we'll go through this morning really in a mile high sense. So just a broad overview of how starting with the Exodus and how the Israelites proceeded from there, and looking at it really from an application standpoint. So how does it apply to us? I think we've had some really good discussions in the class on Jeremiah about how what's happened to the Israelites has a good application to us as Christians today. So I'd like to go back and review some of that history. What were some of the sins of the Israelites? What did they do against God? And draw some applications for us today from that. So if we look at Romans chapter 15 and verse 4, it says, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope." So we know that the Old Testament is there as an example for us, so we can learn from them. Sort of the basis of what we'll be looking at, the basis of this lesson, I guess, not necessarily the text, because the text will be looking a lot at the Old Testament, but I guess sort of the thought basis for this lesson is from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Let's read verses 1 through 11 real quick. "Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drinks, for they drank of the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come." So there's a callback here to the Jews, some of the things that the Jews did that were not pleasing to God. And we'll look at some of this in a little bit more detail. But this is sort of our example of what we're going to look at this morning. So I tried to find a map, a good map, one that you could see, that showed sort of Egypt and then the Red Sea and Mount Sinai and all the way across Jordan. This one doesn't really show Jordan very well. If you see up in the top right corner, there's Mount Nebo, so the Jordan River is like right there. But so I wanted to get the whole the whole journey of the Israelites from Egypt to Canaan on one map, but I couldn't get it. So I've got another map that we'll show. So I want to start just by tracking the history of the Israelites through the Exodus. So what was the series of events? What points can we say? Can we draw from that so that we can make application? So first, we know that Jacob and his family joins Joseph in Egypt. Remember the story how Joseph was sold into slavery, and then through the providence of God, he becomes a great leader in Egypt, and then later on Jacob and his family come to join him in Egypt. So let's look at, I hope y'all can see that. I know that's really tiny. Can everybody see those? Maybe. Shanna's like maybe, and she's probably the closest of anybody. So let's look at Genesis chapter 46, verses 28 and 29. And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen. And Joseph made ready his chariot, went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen, and presented him unto him. And he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. So you've got the reuniting of Jacob and Joseph here in Egypt. And if you skip down to chapter 47, in verse number 27, and Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. So you've got, we see Jacob joined Joseph in Egypt. The Israelites joined him, his whole family joined him here, and Jacob himself lived in Egypt for 17 years. But you've got that reuniting between the father and son that was lost. But this is the entrance of Jacob, we'll say, the entrance of Jacob and his family into Egypt. If we flip over to Exodus, we'll look at Exodus chapter 1. We know that the Israelites, so Jacob and his family, the nation of Israel, came to Egypt. They lived in Egypt for some period of time, and then they're taken into bondage by the Egyptians. So looking at chapter 1, verse 8, now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And then skipping down to verse number 13. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service, wherein they made them serve, was with rigor. So we see now the Israelites have lived in Egypt peacefully for some period of time, and now they're taken into bondage. So Israel cries out to God because of the bondage in Egypt, and so God's plan is to send a deliverer unto the Israelites to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. We know this is going to be Moses. So let's look in Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse number 7. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land, and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come unto me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppress them. Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. So I forgot to do my transitions here. So the people on the live stream won't be able to see the transitions, but everybody here will be able to see them. So this is point number 1. Jacob and his family joins Joseph in Egypt. So they're in the land of Goshen there in Egypt. Some period of time passes, and now the Israelites are taken into bondage. So they're in Egyptian bondage. God is sending Moses in order to lead them out. So next we'll see that Moses leads the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. Exodus chapter 12. We'll look at verse number 29. I know we're going through this kind of quick, but there is a lot of ground that I'd like to cover this morning. So, Exodus chapter 12, starting in verse number 29. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, Rise up and get ye forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds as ye have said, and be gone and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We be all dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver, jewels of gold, and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. So you see, of course, we know that this was after the 10 plagues. So Moses comes to Egypt to deliver the Israelites out of bondage. God sends the 10 plagues upon Israel. It wasn't until the 10th plague here that we see the death of the firstborn son that Pharaoh finally says, okay, I'm going to let you go. And we see this context. Not only does he say, I'm going to let you go, but everybody's like, get out. Like, here, take this. Here's some gold, here's some silver. And it says the people told him to get out in haste. So God has led Moses to deliver the Israelites, so now they're ready to leave Egypt and the bondage there. Looking at verse number 40 from Exodus chapter 12. Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is the night of the Lord to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. So we see our next point here we're getting to is the Passover, so that there's, this is the night of the Lord to be observed. So we know that the Passover was instituted for the Israelites after this 10th plague, or during the time of this 10th plague. So they sacrificed the lamb, they put the blood on the doorpost. So then those that did that were saved from the death of the firstborn son. So let's look at the institution of the Passover. We'll see that this is in connection with the exodus of Egypt, right? So they're on their way out of bondage of Egypt. The Passover feast is instituted. So in chapter 12, verse 3, Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. Verse number 5, Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper door of the post, wherein they shall eat it. And then verse number 12, For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord, and the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. So we see that God saved the Israelites from the 10th plague by the blood of the lamb that was on the doorpost. And then he sets up this Passover feast as a memorial to the Israelites to remind them that he saved them from this and that he led them out of Egyptian bondage. So the Israelites are free from Egypt. They leave. The Passover Feast is here instituted because we know they're getting ready to cross over the Red Sea. Before they cross over the Red Sea, here we see the Passover is instituted. Now the Israelites are getting ready to cross the Red Sea, but first we'll see that the Egyptians are pursuing the Israelites. So let's look at chapter 14, starting in verse number 5. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants were turned against the people. And they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot, and he took his people with him, and he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. So Pharaoh has changed his mind. Now he's angry. He wants to bring the people back. So Pharaoh is pursuing the children of Israel. And I guess something that I had forgotten, or maybe I didn't have a good appreciation for in this context, is how close the Egyptians got to the Israelites. I guess I always think of them crossing the Red Sea, and then the Egyptians come in. But we'll see here in a minute. You see how they got actually very close to the Israelites, it seems. So looking at verse number 10. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is it not this the word that we did tell them in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. So the Israelites have just been delivered, and so they cried to God to be delivered from the bondage of the Egyptians. God sends Moses to deliver them. They're just barely outside, just barely got outside, Goshen there, and the Egyptians come pursuing them. They see the Egyptians coming, and they're automatically saying, Hey, it would have been better if we'd have just stayed. And why didn't we just stay there? Right? We should have just stayed there. And obviously, I'm sure it was a frightful sight to see, the greatest army in the world at that time pursuing you. But so the Israelites didn't get very far, and they've already started murmuring against God. Why did you bring us out? Why didn't you just leave us in Egypt? We would have been content to continue to serve the Egyptians if we were there. But we know good and well they weren't content, because they had been crying out to God to save them from that. So the Israelites now cross the Red Sea. The Egyptians are in hot pursuit of them. We stay in chapter 14. Look at verse number 21. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians tried to follow them. Verse number 23, the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians. And took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared. And the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. When the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the hosts of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them, there remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and His servant Moses. So now Israel was just murmuring against God. God has saved them from Egypt, the mightiest army in the world at this time. I don't think we're told. Maybe we don't know how many people died, but it was obviously a lot of people a lot of Egyptians that were killed in their pursuit of Israel. And I think it's interesting where you even see that their wheels come off their chariots, and they're saying, "Hey, let's get out of here. God is fighting for the Israelites against us." So we see the power of God. The Egyptians saw the power of God, and of course the Israelites saw the power of God. And we see at the end of this chapter, they believed the Lord and His servant Moses. So they've crossed the Red Sea. They're headed down to Mount Sinai. So we know that God is going to give Moses the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. So the Israelites are headed there. But before, we know the story, before Moses gets the 10 Commandments, the Israelites have already turned back to idolatry, and now they've made a golden calf. So let's look at Exodus chapter 31. Let's look at verse number 18. And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communion with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone written with the finger of God. So Moses has been on Mount Sinai. He's received the 10 Commandments. And then in chapter 32, and when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said unto him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him. And Aaron said unto them, Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, of your sons, and of your daughters, and bring them unto me. And all the people brake off the golden earrings which were in their ears, and brought them unto Aaron. And he received them at their hand, and fashioned it with a graving tool, after he had made it a golden calf. And they said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early on the morrow, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat, to drink, and rose up to play. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go get thee down, for thy people, which thou broughtest up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereunto, and said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. So, I'm not sure exactly how long it took the Israelites to get from the Red Sea down to Mount Sinai. It wasn't terribly long, say maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months of journey. And now they've already turned back to idol worship, and Aaron, the high priest, or who will become the high priest, is the one that made the golden calf for him, right? So, if you remember in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse number 7, it says, Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat, drink, and rose up to play. So this is in 1 Corinthians 10, which we're using sort of as an example of our basis for the Israelites as an example. That's basically a quotation here from Exodus chapter 32. Look at verse 6. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat, to drink, and rose up to play. So the Israelites have just barely gotten out of Egypt. They've been delivered out of bondage. We saw that they believed God in Moses. After crossing the Red Sea, they saw the power of God. They get down to Mount Sinai for Moses to receive the law, and they've already turned back to idolatry. And I think that so let's look at Exodus. Let's look at chapter 32, verse 9, starting in verse 9. I think this is an interesting passage. So if you see in verses 7 and 8, God is telling Moses, these people have turned from me, they made a god, and he's even saying, These be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt, which they saw God deliver them, and now all of a sudden they've made this golden calf, and they're saying, This is the God that has delivered us from the Egyptians. But in verse number 9, It says, And the Lord said unto Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them, and I will make of thee a great nation. And Moses besought the Lord his God, and said, Lord, why doth thy wrath wax hot against thy people, which thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Wherefore should the Egyptians speak and say, For mischief did he bring them out, to slay them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from thy fierce wrath, and repent of this evil against thy people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou swearest by thy own self, and saidst unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of will I give unto your seed, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto this people. So God's wrath was invoked against the Israelites because of their idolatry. And now we see Moses interceding on the Israelites' behalf. He's reminding God of his promise, the seed promise of Abraham. God even says, hey, I'm going to destroy these people, and I'm going to make of you a greater nation. But Moses intercedes on the people's behalf, and then God decides, to not do that. So they get the law. We know the next thing we see is the wandering in the wilderness. So the Israelites are at Mount Sinai. They get the Ten Commandments. They're on their way to the Promised Land to inherit the land. If we go to Numbers chapter 13, we'll see that they send spies into the land. So the plan is for the Israelites to come to take the land from the inhabitants. They send 12 spies in to spy the land. We see in verse number 1, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall you send a man, every one a ruler among them. Verse number 17, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get ye up this way southward, and go up into the mountains, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that they dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not, and be ye of good courage, and bring of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of the first striped grapes. And then verse number 26, And they went and came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel unto the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. They told him and said, We came unto the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled, very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of a great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So the 12 spies go in, they spy the land, they come out and say, Hey, we can't take this land. These people are mightier than we are. There's no way we can take this land. Even though they've forgotten that God has promised to give this land to them. So looking in chapter 14, we see Israel murmur against God again. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? And wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land, to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return into Egypt? And they said one to another, let us make a captain, and let us return unto Egypt. So they're murmuring again. They're again saying, we should have just stayed in Egypt, which, again, when they were in Egypt, they were crying to be delivered from that. Looking at verse number 11, we'll see that Moses begins to intercede on the Israelites' behalf again. The Lord said unto Moses, how long will this people provoke me? And how long will it be ere they believe me for all the signs which I have showed among them? I will smite them with the pestilence, and will disinherit them, and will make of thee a greater nation, and mightier than they. And Moses said unto the Lord, then the Egyptians shall hear it, for thou broughtest up this people in thy might from among them. And they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land, for they have heard that thou, Lord, art among this people, that thou, Lord, art seen face to face, and that thy cloud standeth over them, and thou goest before them by daytime in a pillar of cloud, and a pillar of fire by night. Now if thou shalt kill all this people as one man, then the nations which have heard the fame of thee will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land which he sware unto them, therefore he has slain them in the wilderness. And then verse number 19, pardon, I beseech thee, iniquity of this people, according unto the greatness of thy mercy, and as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt unto now. So Moses is interceding on the people's behalf again. Verse number 20, it says, and the Lord said, I have pardoned according to thy word. So God has decided not to destroy the people again, but he does punish Israel for their disobedience and disbelief in him. In verse number 29, we see, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. And then verse number 34, after the number of the days in which ye search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and ye shall know my breach of promise. So, for their lack of faith and their disbelief in God, God punishes the Israelites, and they're now to wander in this wilderness for 40 years until that generation dies out. God tells them, your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness. So the wilderness was most likely somewhere in this area that you see on the screen, somewhere in there. So the Israelites leave Mount Sinai, they go to the wilderness, and they remain there for the next 40 years. Let me switch to the next slide. So now you can see, so this is roughly the same area that we looked at on the other map. This is the wilderness area. So the people are there. They're there for 40 years. We see Moses dies, and now Joshua is appointed as the leader of Israel. This is in Joshua chapter 1. We're still on the trek to Canaan, right? They're still on their way to their promised land. But in Joshua chapter 1, now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. So Moses has died, Joshua was appointed as leader, and God has told Joshua, I want you to lead these people across the Jordan River into the promised land that I've promised to give them. So then in Joshua chapter 3, looking at verses, starting at verse number 14, and it came to pass when the people were removed from their tents, passed over Jordan, and the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people. And as they that bear the ark were come into Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon a heap very far from the city Adam, that is beside Zeraton, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. And the priests that bare the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. So now the Israelites come up here they pass over close to Jericho. So Joshua leads the people around. They cross over the Jordan River, very similar to the Red Sea, right? They pass on dry ground across the river, and now they're into the promised land around Jericho. So I know we went through that pretty quick. That was a real quick summary, I guess, of the Exodus, how the Israelites got from Egypt into the Promised Land. But so the whole point of this is I want to draw some connections, some applications from their journey to their Christian journey. So remember 1 Corinthians chapter 10 that we looked at said that all this was done from the Israelites as an example to us. So what are the examples that we can learn as Christians from this journey that they made? So we see the Israelites had an entrance into Egypt, right? That they weren't always in Egypt. Remember that Joseph was there, and now the Israelites come to join Joseph in Egypt. So there's an entrance of the Israelites into Egypt. For us as Christians, there's an entrance into the world, right? So we're all born into the world. So the entrance into Egypt can be viewed as our the same as our entrance into the world as our birth here on earth. So the Israelites are in Egypt. They live there peacefully for some period of time. I didn't spend a whole lot of time looking at the time frame, but it was at least 130 years. I know we see the 400 years, but I used the 130 because some of the information that I've seen says that the 400 years counted sometime before they were actually in Egyptian bondage. So just for conservative, just being conservative, let's take the lower year and say it was only 130 years. It was somewhere between 140, 130, maybe up to 430, right? So let's just say for the sake of argument that it's 130 years. So the Israelites lived peacefully in Egypt for 130 years before they were taken into Egyptian bondage. We as people live peacefully on earth for some period of time, probably less than 130 years, but some period of time before we're taken into sin bondage, right? So the Egyptian bondage for the Israelites is applicable to us in bondage under sin in the New Testament. I know the age of accountability, I think it's worth looking at a little bit because we use that term, but what does the age of accountability mean? Generally, we're saying it's because a baby that's newly born doesn't know right from wrong, right? There's some period of time that it takes before a person is able to understand right from wrong and really be responsible for their actions. Whereas you won't see the term age of accountability in the Bible per se, but I think we'll all agree the concept is there. Just look at Isaiah chapter 7, starting in verse number 14. It says, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good." So this is actually talking about Jesus. The virgin shall conceive. But in verse number 15, it says that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. And in verse number 16, "For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings." So there's a period of time here that even the child, it's talking about Jesus, does not know, cannot discern from good or evil. And then looking at chapter 11, verse number 3, Isaiah chapter 11, verse number 3, "It shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears." This goes in connection with Luke chapter 2. So it says that Isaiah 11, verse 3 says, "Shall make him of quick understanding." And then in Luke chapter 2, verses 46 and 47, this is talking about Jesus. It says, "And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers." So this is him as a child, right? So he's had a quick understanding to the extent that he's impressed the doctors and lawyers here. But that itself implies there was a time that he didn't have the understanding, as all children have a period of time where they don't have the understanding of right and wrong. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 5. This is the last verse. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 12. For when the time you ought to be teachers, you have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat. For everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. So the context here in Hebrews really is talking about the Christians, right? As a Christian, when you first become a Christian, you're a babe in Christ, and you're not, you don't eat the strong meat right off the bat. You're focusing on the milk of the Word, the first principles, but there's a period of time of growth. So we can see that's a mirror of our actual life. As a child, we don't know right from wrong from birth. There's a period of time of growth, and it may be different for everybody. But there is a period of time where you don't know right from wrong. You learn right from wrong, and just as we see that in the Christian walk, you grow. We have the same thing in our children as we grow. I know I just thought it was worth spending a little bit of time on that because it fits into our lesson really well. So now we see Moses delivered Israel from Egyptian bondage. We know that Christ delivered Christians from sin bondage. Galatians chapter 1. Flip over to Galatians chapter 1, verse 4. Who gave himself for our sins that he might deliver us from this present evil world according to the will of God and our Father. And then in John chapter 1, verse 29, you see when John, this is our account, when John sees Jesus, he says, the next day John seeth Jesus coming unto him, and he saith, Behold, the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. So we see the application here. The Israelites were in Egypt. They're taken to Egyptian bondage, then they were delivered from that bondage. We as Christians are born into the world. We live into the world some period of time until we reach the age of accountability. We enter into sin bondage at that point in time when we sin willfully, knowing right from wrong, and then Christ delivered us from the bondage of sin. We see that the Passover Feast was instituted before they crossed the Red Sea. That involved the shedding of blood, so they had the lamb, that they put the blood on the doorpost, and that was to be a memorial for Israel. They remembered that. They were supposed to remember that, forever, as a memorial for God saving them from Egyptian bondage. So we see in the New Testament the Lord's Supper was instituted. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, we have a summary here. 1 Corinthians 11, chapter 11, verse 23. For I have received of the Lord that which I also delivered unto you, that the Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he brake it and said, Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. And after the same manner he took the cup, when he had supped, saying, This cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do ye, as oft as ye drink it, in remembrance of me. For as often as ye eat this bread and drink this cup, you do show the Lord's death till he come. So again, the Lord's Supper was instituted. There was a shedding of blood on Jesus' behalf, and it's a memorial to us as Christians today to remember his sacrifice. We have Israel pursued by Egypt. So the Israelites come out of bondage. The Egyptians then pursue them. So the Egyptians didn't give up that bondage easily, right? So they didn't just let them go, even though you have them saying, "Here, get out." But the bondage of the Egyptians didn't end easily. Just like to us today as Christians, maybe the sin of the world that we were involved in, it's hard to break free from, and also Satan pursues Christians, very, very ferociously in the New Testament. So the world and Satan did not give up easily as well. So looking at Matthew chapter 13, Matthew 13, starting verse number 24. And another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. And while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. And when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? And he saith unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go up and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but together the wheat into my barn. And in verse number 37, you've got Jesus explaining this parable to his disciples. He answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. So you've got Satan. Satan has a work, right? He has a work that he's doing, just like we have work that we're doing. He's sowing tares among the children of the children of God. So the Egyptians didn't give up easily. Sin, Satan, and the world doesn't give up easily on us. We see that Israel murmured against God. We see that Christians murmur against God. Luke chapter 9, verse 62. And Jesus said unto them, No man having put his hand to the plow and looketh back is fit for the kingdom of God. If you think about the Israelites coming out of, so they cry to God for deliverance from Egyptian bondage. God sends Moses, takes them out. They barely got on the other side, outside of Egypt, before they're murmuring against God and say, it would have been better if we'd have just stayed in Egypt. Why did you bring us out here to die in this wilderness? Let's just go back to Egypt and stay. Jesus tells us that any man that puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not fit for the kingdom of God. So it's a serious accusation for us as Christians to murmur against God. Why have you done this to me? Or maybe my life is no better as a Christian. Why don't I just go back and be and live of the world, or something to that nature? But so we can, I think, certainly learn from the Israelites, from their example, that we should have faith in God. We see them constantly doubting God, constantly not having faith in God, even after He leads them across the Red Sea. So to us as Christians, we should do our best to have faith in God and not repeat the mistakes of the Israelites there. We see that the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. This is sort of an interesting concept, but you see here in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, refers to this as the baptism of Moses, looking at verses 1 and 2. Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea. So if you remember, they had the walls of the water of the Red Sea on both sides. The cloud of God was above them, so they were covered with water. They passed through the water, just like Christians today. We cross through the waters of baptism in the baptism of Christ. We have the golden calf. We see they get on the other side of the Red Sea, and now they build this golden calf to worship. So Israel gave in to the sin of idolatry that they struggle with so much. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1 mentions the sin that does so easily beset us. It says, Hebrews 12 verse 1, Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Without a doubt, idolatry was probably the sin that very easily beset the Israelites. We said they constantly turned back to idolatry. We as Christians, everybody has most likely some sin that you would say easily beset you, right? We all struggle with different things. But there's probably a sin that we all struggle with more than other sins. I think of something like, just for example, maybe addiction. So just because you become a Christian doesn't mean that your addiction just magically is washed away, right? You could say that the Israelites were addicted to idolatry. Just because they were under God didn't mean that they never fell into idolatry again. But the purpose is for us as Christians to strive to resist those temptations and not give in to those sins. So I thought we would finish today, but we're just a little bit behind, so I've got 9 or 10 points. So we'll finish next week, and then we'll pick up with some more specific examples of what I want to look at as far as the Israelites and their sin against God. So thank you, everybody.